Good evening from Palm Beach, Florida, and welcome to Document News. My name is Mia Skar, and this is Henry Galeano, a U.S. contributor. Welcome, Henry. Nice to have you.
Thank you, Mia. Before we get into it, let's take a look at the entrance at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort here in Palm Beach this weekend. These roadblocks are the so-called extra security measures put in place a few days ago. The reason being, of course, the rising tension from the conflict in Iran.
Wow, look at that. It's not so pretty, but hopefully safe. However, further south of Mar-a-Lago in Miami, a significant geopolitical meeting was held over this weekend at the Trump National Doral Resort. President Trump hosted the Shield of the Americas Summit, a gathering of Latin American leaders focused on regional security and cooperation.
Yes, the setting itself is symbolic. Miami is one of the main gateways between the United States and Latin America, politically, economically, and culturally. The connection was on full display as leaders and presidents from across the region met for the summit. The order of the day was to launch the new initiative to crush drug cartels and the criminal networks that operate across the hemisphere.
All right, let's take a look.
For decades, leaders in this region have allowed large swaths of territory, the Western Hemisphere, to come under the direct control, and transnational gangs have taken over. Every leader here today is united in the conviction that we cannot and will not tolerate the lawlessness in our hemisphere any longer. The only way to defeat these enemies is by unleashing the power of our militaries. We have to bring the cartel presence in our region. We must recognize the epicenter of cartel violence is Mexico. The Mexican cartels are fueling and orchestrating much of the bloodshed and chaos in this hemisphere, and the United States government will do whatever is necessary to defend our national security and to protect the safety of the American people. No, look, it's coming through Mexico.
So before we get into the analysis, let's start with the basics. Who were actually present at this summit?
Well, several of the region's most prominent law and order presidents were there. We had Argentina's President Javier Milei, El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele, and Ecuador's President Daniel Noboa. Also attending were other leaders and presidents across Central and South America. The goal of the event is to create new security partnerships known as the Shield of the Americas.
Shield of the Americas. But the guest list was just as notable for who weren't there. Three of the region's most powerful countries, Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia, were absent. These nations together account for a huge share of Latin America's economy and population. They also sit at the center of the region's migration routes and narcotics corridors. So their absence is kind of striking.
Yes, well, they had all the right-wing presidents of the region, and it was the first patriotic right-wing meeting in history. Traditionally, these meetings, like the old Summit of the Americas, were built around the idea of inclusion. This gathering is different. It's selective. We are seeing a coalition of governments that share a similar outlook on security and regional politics.
So that brings us to the main announcement coming out of Miami, the creation of what is being called the America's Counter Cartel Coalition. So the participating countries were signing a charter committing themselves to a deeper cooperation against drug cartels and organized crime. That includes intelligence sharing, coordinated operations, and closer military-to-military cooperation. And President Trump has been pretty direct about the approach he wants to take on this.
Direct indeed. In his remarks, he argued that the era of purely police-led solution to the cartel violence is over. His administration is advocating for a more forceful strategy, encouraging the regional governments to use their military force, use the military to dismantle the cartel networks that operate across the borders.
So this is not just a law enforcement initiative, it's a security alliance.
Precisely. That's why some of analysts are describing the broader doctrine behind it as something new. They're calling it the Monroe Doctrine.
The Monroe Doctrine, as in Donald Trump, just a play on the old Monroe Doctrine.
Exactly. The original Monroe Doctrine, as in President James Monroe, is from the 19th century, which established the idea that the Western Hemisphere would be a strategic sphere of influence for the United States. Now, the modern version, the Monroe, being named after Donald, of course, is being discussed today it adds a new emphasis: security cooperation, anti-cartel operations, protection from the regions, from outside powers and influence.
Outside powers, which brings us to the other major theme then hanging over this summit, China. Over the past decade, China has actually invested heavily in Latin America, financing infrastructure, building ports, and developing mining operations for strategic minerals such as lithium. The United States is increasingly concerned about that growing presence. So the Shield of America has a geopolitical dimension as well.
Yes, it certainly does. The idea is to strengthen the economic and security ties amongst governments that are aligned with Washington, offering them investment partnerships to an alternative to the Chinese financing. In effect, the initiative aims to keep the Western Hemisphere strategically anchored in the United States.
So, and the summit was also had another topic, as it was shaped by the recent events of Venezuela. Let's watch another clip here.
During the cartel presence in our region, we must recognize the epicenter of cartel violence is Mexico. The Mexican cartels are fueling and orchestrating much of the bloodshed and chaos in this hemisphere, and the United States government will do whatever is necessary to defend our national security and to protect the safety of the American people. No, look, it's coming through Mexico. In January, America's armed forces also ended the reign of one of the biggest cartel kingpins of all, with the Operation Absolute Resolve to bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice, in a precision raid that nobody's ever seen anything like it. This was in a very powerful military base, fort. And they went in and they took him out and they got him out, and people couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it. We were right into the heart and took him out. And it was nasty. It was about 18 minutes of pure violence. And we took him out. We lost nobody. Not one person was lost. Not one aircraft or no military equipment. Zero. People have never seen anything like it. And you're talking about into a military base with a lot of soldiers, good soldiers. Since that operation, we've been working closely with the new president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, who's doing a great job working with us.
Yes, there it is, capturing the leader of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro. It has dramatically shifted the political landscape in the region. We're probably only in the early stages of it. So we'll see the removal of Maduro as a turning point in Washington. And we can see that decisive actions are being taken, which can reshape the politics in the region. Well, that's not all. Speaking of turning points, the administration has made several pointed comments about Cuba as well.
Of course, Cuba. Trump made some pointed comments on that too during his speech at the summit. Let's listen in.
As we achieve a historic transformation in Venezuela, we're also looking forward to the great change that will soon be coming to Cuba. Cuba's at the end of the line. They're very much at the end of the line. They have no money. They have no oil. They have a bad philosophy. They have a bad regime that's been bad for a long time. And they used to get the money from Venezuela. They get the oil from Venezuela. But they don't have any money from Venezuela. They don't have any oil. They don't have anything from... People can't even... They land in Cuba. They can't get gasoline to fly out. They have to leave their planes behind. And they want to negotiate, and they are negotiating with Marco and myself and some others. And I would think a deal would be made very easily with Cuba. But for 50 years, I've been hearing, as a little boy, I'd be hearing about Cuba. Cuba's a disaster. But I've been hearing so much about Cuba. But Cuba's in its last moments of life, as it was. It'll have a great new life, but it's in its last moments of life the way it is.
So some officials have hinted that further pressure on Havana may be coming. That has added another layer of tension to this meeting, because for many governments in Latin America, the question of sovereignty remains highly sensitive. I'm thinking, which raises the larger question, what kind of regional order is going to emerge from all of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, we do see that there's a shift away. They're shifting away from these large multilateral institutions towards smaller alliances, which can be built around shared political priorities, security cooperation, economic alignments, and resistance to outside influences, which are the core pillars of this summit.
But that strategy also has its risk, I guess. Critics are pointing out that without Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia involved, the hemisphere could become increasingly divided, and that makes it harder to tackle exactly the problems that this initiative aims to solve: drug trafficking, migration, and economic instability.
Yes. So, in a sense, the summit here in Florida, it's marking a new phase in hemispheric politics rather than a broad regional forum. The United States appears to be building a tighter strategic bloc of partners in Americas. And the supporters of this sees a restoration of order and leadership. And the critics, well, they worry it could deepen political divisions across the Americas.
So either way, what happened down here in Florida over the weekend could have lasting consequences for the entire hemisphere.
Absolutely. Again, this was more than a summit. It was the beginning of what a new strategic America can look like. And President Trump is reshaping the global order right before our eyes.
And that is something we will continue to look for. And thank you for watching. Remember, if you like this video, please click thumbs up, and we will make more content from Documents. Goodbye for now.